There's a threshold in every conflict beyond which the question of whether a war has started becomes irrelevant, because the war has already made that decision for the people who were still debating it. For the last 18 months, the United States has been conducting what its officials carefully described as support operations, intelligence sharing, defensive assistance, and force protection activities in a region where its closest ally was fighting a multi-front war against an adversary that has openly declared the destruction of that ally as a foundational objective of its government. Washington maintained, with increasing strain on the credibility of the claim, that America was not a party to the conflict. That claim died at 2:17 local time this morning when Iranian ballistic missiles and drone salvos struck al-Udeid Air Base in Qatar, al-Asad Air Base in Iraq, and Salem Air Base in Kuwait in a coordinated simultaneous attack that killed 17 American service members, wounded 63 more, destroyed or damaged 14 aircraft, and left 3 of the most strategically critical American military installations in the world burning in the pre-dawn darkness. America is at war, not because it chose to be, because Iran chose for it. To understand the full strategic weight of what Iran targeted, you need to understand what these 3 bases represent in the architecture of American military power in the Middle East. Al-Udeid Air Base in Qatar is the largest American military installation in the entire Middle East, home to approximately 10,000 U.S. personnel, housing the forward headquarters of U.S. Central Command, and operating the Air Operations Center that coordinates every American air mission across a geographic area spanning 20 countries. When American aircraft fly combat missions anywhere from the Horn of Africa to the Afghan border, the command and control backbone of those missions runs through Al-Udeid. It is not merely a base. It is the brain of American military operations across an entire region. Ain al-Asad in Iraq is the base that Iran has threatened most publicly and most consistently. It was the target of Iranian ballistic missile strikes in January 2020 following the killing of Qasem Soleimani, and the IRGC has never stopped treating it as a primary target symbol. Ali al-Salem in Kuwait is the primary staging hub for American ground forces in the Gulf region and the key logistics node through which American military equipment and personnel flow in and out of the theater. Iran did not pick these 3 targets randomly. It picked the command center, the symbolic target, and the logistics hub. It picked the targets that, struck simultaneously, produced the maximum disruption to American operational capability across the entire theater. Here is the strike sequence, as it is now understood from the damage assessments and after-action reports being compiled at U.S. Central Command. The attack began not with the missiles, but with the electronic warfare preparation that preceded them. Approximately 40 minutes before the first physical strike, American signals intelligence detected coordinated jamming activity targeting the GPS navigation systems used by American air defense batteries at all 3 locations simultaneously. This jamming was sophisticated enough to degrade the targeting accuracy of Patriot PSE-3 batteries at Al-Udeid and Ain al-Asad during the critical early intercept window, not eliminating the air defense capability entirely, but introducing enough uncertainty into the targeting solutions to reduce first-shot kill probability at the moment when first-shot kill probability is the difference between a successful intercept and a hit. The ballistic missile salvos followed the jamming by approximately 38 minutes, time to arrive as American air defense crews were still working to reestablish full targeting confidence after the GPS disruption. At Al-Udeid, 4 K-bar Shekin missiles were fired. 2 were intercepted. 2 hit. At Ain al-Asad, 3 missiles were fired. 1 was intercepted. 2 hit. At Ali al-Salem, a combination of ballistic missiles and Shahed series loitering munitions was used, the drones arriving in the gaps between missile intercept engagements to exploit the reload windows of Kuwait's Patriot batteries. The coordination between missile salvos and drone waves, timed to the reload cycle of specific air defense systems, indicates a level of operational intelligence about American air defense procedures that goes beyond what Iran could have developed independently. The casualty figures, 17 dead, 63 wounded, carry a specific political weight that requires direct acknowledgement. American military personnel have been killed by Iranian-supplied weapons before, most recently through proxy forces in Iraq and Syria. But the operational and political distinction between being killed by an Iranian-supplied rocket fired by an Iranian-aligned militia and being killed by an Iranian ballistic missile fired directly by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, Aerospace Force from Iranian territory is not merely semantic. It is the distinction between a proxy engagement that maintains the fiction of Iranian non-involvement and a direct state-on-state military attack against American forces by the Islamic Republic of Iran. Iran has crossed that line before. The January 2020 strikes on Ain al-Asad were direct Iranian military action, but those strikes produced no American casualties, were preceded by warning, and occurred in a specific retaliatory context that both sides allowed to define a de-escalation ceiling. Tonight's strikes were not preceded by warning, They were not designed to avoid casualties. They were designed to maximize them. And the 17 flag-draped caskets that will arrive at Dover Air Force Base in the coming days are the instrument through which Iran has forced the American political system to confront a question it has been avoiding for 18 months. What does the United States actually do when Americans die at Iranian hands? The White House Situation Room has been in continuous session since 02:31 this morning. The President convened the National Security Council at 03:15. The Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, the Secretary of Defense, the Director of Central Intelligence, and the National Security Advisor are all present. The targeting packages that have been on American planning shelves for years, strike options against IRGC Aerospace Force launch infrastructure, against K-bar Shekin production and storage facilities, against IRGC command and control nodes, against Iranian naval assets in the Persian Gulf, are on the table. The military recommendation from Central Command is unambiguous. A direct, large-scale strike against the specific IRGC units and infrastructure responsible for tonight's attack, conducted within the next 6 to 12 hours before Iran can disperse assets and harden positions in anticipation of retaliation. The military logic is sound. The military capability exists. And the military recommendation will not be implemented as cleanly as the generals are presenting it, because the questions that follow the first American strike on Iranian soil are questions that no targeting package can answer. Here is the specific escalation sequence that the National Security Council is working through, and here is why every step in that sequence leads somewhere that the previous step made harder to control. American strikes on IRGC launch infrastructure in Iran, which is the minimum militarily credible response to the killing of 17 American service members, will be presented by Tehran as justification for the next phase of its military campaign, which Iranian strategic doctrine has always designated as the full activation of every instrument of Iranian power simultaneously. That means Hormuz closure. That means mass missile strikes against Gulf state infrastructure, Saudi Aramco, UAE energy facilities, Bahraini financial infrastructure. That means activation of every remaining proxy network from Lebanon to Yemen to Iraq to target American and allied assets across the region in a volume and tempo that current American force protection postures cannot fully absorb. That means, according to intelligence assessments that have been circulating at the highest classification levels for the past 72 hours, possible Iranian activation of its chemical weapons stockpile, which has never been fully declared or destroyed, and which the IRGC has retained as an instrument of last resort, against American base populations in enclosed or semi-enclosed facilities where dispersal and decontamination capacity is limited. The escalation ladder that begins with American strikes on Iranian soil does not have a clearly visible top rung, and every American military planner in the Situation Room tonight knows it. The congressional dimension of this crisis has activated with a speed that reflects the raw political force of American military casualties. Within 2 hours of the attack confirmation, the chairs and ranking members of both the Senate and House Armed Services Committees had been briefed and had issued public statements. The statements divide, with remarkable clarity, along the line that has defined American foreign policy debate for the last 3 years. Those who argue that the killing of American soldiers demands an immediate and overwhelming military response against Iran directly, and those who argue that the strategic risks of escalation require a calibrated response that punishes Iran without triggering the general war that would impose catastrophic costs on American forces across the region. What is notable about this division is that it does not follow partisan lines as cleanly as either party's leadership would prefer. There are hawkish voices in both parties demanding direct strikes on Iran. There are cautionary voices in both parties warning that the escalation risks are being underestimated. And there are voices, smaller in number but significant in institutional weight, who are asking the question that the entire architecture of American Middle East policy for the last 18 months has been designed to avoid. If American forces are being killed by Iranian missiles fired from Iranian territory at American bases in 3 countries simultaneously, at what point does the authorization for use of military force that Congress has never formally provided for this conflict become not merely a legal technicality but a constitutional crisis? The regional reaction is unfolding along the fault lines that this conflict has been deepening for 18 months. Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman convened an emergency session of the Saudi National Security Council within 90 minutes of the attack confirmation. Not because Saudi Arabia was targeted tonight, but because the Saudi leadership understands with perfect clarity that the Aramco strikes of days ago and tonight's strikes on American bases are elements of a single coordinated Iranian campaign, and that the next phase of that campaign will return to Gulf state energy infrastructure, with whatever operational lessons Iran drew from the initial Aramco engagement. The UAE has placed its air defense systems on maximum alert and has begun quietly accelerating the dispersal of civilian aircraft away from Abu Dhabi International Airport and Dubai International Airport, the same airport that appeared in the competitor content this channel's audience is familiar with. in anticipation of potential Iranian drone attacks against civilian aviation infrastructure designed to collapse Gulf tourism and financial sector confidence. Qatar faces the most acute immediate dilemma. It hosts al-Udeid, the base that was just struck, which makes it technically a co-belligerent in any conflict between the US and Iran, regardless of Doha's carefully maintained official neutrality, while simultaneously serving as the primary back-channel diplomatic intermediary between Iran and the West, whose functioning depends on Qatar's perceived neutrality being accepted by all parties. China's response has been swift, carefully worded, and deeply revealing about Beijing's actual priorities in this crisis. The Chinese Foreign Ministry issued a statement within 3 hours of the attack, calling for maximum restraint from all parties, urging an immediate ceasefire, and offering Chinese mediation between Iran and the United States. The statement was notable for what it did not include: any condemnation of Iran for attacking American military personnel, any acknowledgement that the killing of 17 soldiers by a state military force constitutes an act of war under any recognized framework of international law, any indication that China would use its substantial influence over Tehran, influence purchased through the Basing Rights Agreement, the weapons technology transfers, and the energy contracts that have defined the Chinese-Iranian partnership, to pressure Iran toward de-escalation. What China's statement reveals is that Beijing has made its strategic calculation. The damage to American credibility and American military posture in the Middle East that results from tonight's attack is, from China's perspective, a strategic benefit that outweighs the economic costs of the regional instability the attack has generated. China is not going to help end this crisis. China is going to watch it, manage its own exposure to the energy market disruption, and harvest the long-term strategic dividends of watching the United States bleed in a region where China has been steadily building influence for a decade. The next decision point, the one that will determine whether this crisis produces a contained, if devastating, exchange of direct military strikes between the US and Iran, or whether it produces the general regional war that has been the nightmare scenario of every American administration since 1979, is not in Washington. It is in Tehran, because Iran's supreme leadership, in the hours since the attacks, faces its own version of the escalation calculus that is consuming the American Situation Room. Iran has now killed American soldiers directly on American military bases, using Iranian military assets. It has done what it spent 40 years preparing to do, and what its military establishment has always believed was the action that would force American withdrawal from the region. The theory was always that American domestic political will to sustain casualties in a conflict with no clear territorial objective or definable victory condition would collapse faster than Iranian revolutionary commitment to the resistance axis. That theory has never been tested at this scale. With this level of direct Iranian attribution, with this speed of American political mobilization, whether the theory is correct, whether the 17 flag-draped caskets produced the American withdrawal that Iranian strategic planning anticipated, or whether they produced the American military response that Iranian planners always knew carried catastrophic risk, is the question that will define the next decade of Middle Eastern history. And it will be answered, one way or another, before this day is over.